Welcome, the anointed ones. Some truths don't ruin relationships. They ruin the lie that held them together. Most people think intimacy is just physical closeness, a private moment, something that stays between two people. But psychology has already shown us something uncomfortable. Emotional and psychological states are transferable in close contact, especially when boundaries are weak and intentions are unclear. That's not poetry, that's science. Mood contagion, trauma bonding, and emotional imprinting are real phenomena. And once you understand that, a lot of your past starts making sense in ways that are not flattering to the people involved. Here's the part no one likes to say out loud. Some people don't use intimacy to connect, they use it to deposit. Stress they don't want to process, shame they don't want to carry, stories they can't live with alone. And then they walk away lighter, while you're sitting there wondering why you suddenly feel off, tired, irritable, or like your sense of self just got misplaced. It's not romance, it's redistribution. Now, add another layer to it. When someone knows they benefited from you in ways they can't explain or recreate, they don't protect your name, they manage the narrative. That's when private moments become public commentary. Not because you did something wrong, but because they need witnesses. Control feels safer when other people are nodding along. And let's be honest, nothing screams insecurity louder than oversharing something that was supposed to be sacred. That's not confidence, that's panic wearing a smile. What makes this even more interesting is that the exposure didn't happen through confrontation, shouting, or dramatic exits. It happened through awareness, through you clocking the pattern and quietly stepping out of it with your dignity intact. And nothing unsettles people more than someone who understands what just happened and refuses to play confused for their comfort. There's a little humor in it too, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Suddenly, the oversharing makes sense. The "why are they talking so much" makes sense. You realize some people don't miss you. They miss the role you played in stabilizing their chaos. And when that realization hits, it doesn't make you bitter. It makes you clear. And clarity, that's when the truth really starts talking. Number one, they used intimacy as a carrier, not a connection. What you eventually realized is that what felt like closeness wasn't actually about bonding at all. It was about transfer. Some people don't enter intimacy to meet you. They enter it to unload themselves. They bring unresolved anger, envy, insecurity, and identity confusion into closeness, because it's the only place they can drop it without being questioned. Intimacy becomes their delivery system, not their devotion. That's why things felt off afterward. You didn't feel held, energized, or grounded. You felt drained, distracted, and strangely heavy, like something had been misplaced inside you. That wasn't love sickness or attachment. That was your system responding to imbalance. When someone uses intimacy as a carrier, they leave lighter, clearer, even confident, while you're left sorting through emotions that weren't yours to begin with. The hardest part to accept is that this isn't always done consciously. Some people have learned over time that closeness gives them relief. They don't know how to self-regulate, so they regulate through others. They mistake access for healing. And when someone like you comes along, open, present, grounded, you become the perfect container. Not because you're weak, but because you're whole. You exposed this the moment you stopped feeling confused and started feeling observant. You noticed the pattern, how they felt better while you felt worse. How your clarity decreased while their confidence increased. How the intimacy benefited one side far more than the other. Once you saw that, the illusion couldn't survive. That's also why the dynamic changed so quickly when you pulled back. When the carrier is removed, the load has nowhere to go. Suddenly they're restless, irritated, talking too much, explaining themselves to people who didn't ask. That reaction alone told the truth. People who genuinely connect don't unravel when access ends. People who offload do. This is where your power came back, not through confrontation, but through recognition. You stopped treating intimacy like a promise and started treating it like an exchange. And once you understood that exchange was unequal, you ended it without drama. That awareness didn't just protect you, it exposed them. And nothing unsettles someone more than being seen for what they were actually doing, instead of what they claimed they meant. Number 2. What left you entered their mouths first. The moment you realized that private moments weren't staying private, everything clicked. They didn't just betray trust, they weaponized it. Every detail, every nuance, every vulnerability you shared in intimacy became a story they told elsewhere, reshaped to fit their narrative. And the worst part? They weren't even subtle about it. They spread it casually, like it was gossip at a lunch table, like everyone needed to know what you'd given them in confidence. That's the thing about people like this. Intimacy isn't sacred, it's social currency. They use it to prove something, either to themselves or to the people around them, and the more shocking or sensitive, the better it serves their purpose. It's hard to describe the effect this has on someone until you've lived it. You start second-guessing yourself, wondering if every gesture, every word, every bit of honesty will end up in someone else's hands. That constant mental tension is exhausting, and that exhaustion is exactly what they were counting on, even if unconsciously. By leaking your trust, they weren't just sharing stories. They were attempting to destabilize you, to make you small in other people's eyes, to reclaim a sense of control they could never earn fairly. The most telling part is how quickly the narrative changes depending on the audience. One version for friends, another for co-workers, maybe a completely different one for people who barely know you. They craft these stories to confuse, to manipulate perception, and to make themselves look better by comparison. The truth. You become the punchline, the lesson, the example of what they claim you did or didn't do, while your integrity is questioned without reason. You exposed this not by arguing or confronting. It was your calm observation that revealed the pattern. You recognized that what was being spread wasn't a reflection of you, but a projection of their insecurities, their need for validation, and their fear of losing the image of control they had cultivated. By seeing it clearly, you stripped them of power. And that's the part that shakes people the most, when the stories no longer stick, when the gossip no longer lands, and when they realize the person they tried to manipulate sees the truth perfectly. Number 3, they needed you compromised, not loved. What you exposed is one of the harshest truths about certain people. They don't want your light, your strength, or your clarity. They want your confusion. Love, in its real form, elevates and strengthens. It makes people better, more whole. But some people aren't looking for connection. They're looking for leverage. They enter intimacy not to give or share, but to compromise you, to soften your boundaries, and to make you question yourself. Every kind word, every tender gesture, every act of vulnerability becomes a tool to unsettle you, not a bridge to understanding. That's why being close to them always left you feeling disoriented. You didn't just feel drained, you felt off-center, like the ground you thought was solid suddenly wobbled. That's not coincidence. When someone's goal is to compromise, every interaction is designed to blur perception, to push emotional buttons, to make you doubt your own instincts. You weren't being loved, you were being tested, manipulated and reshaped to fit a story that served them. The brilliance of what you did is that you recognized this pattern. You realized the moments of discomfort weren't your fault. They weren't signs that you were too sensitive or overthinking. They were symptoms of someone trying to adjust your inner balance to make you easier to control. Once you saw that, the dynamic could no longer continue in the same way. The intimacy that once felt like a connection became an object lesson in clarity. You stopped participating in their scheme, and suddenly the control they relied on evaporated. That exposure changed everything. People who need others compromised rely on subtlety and invisibility. Their power lies in secrecy, in confusion, in doubt. But once you named the strategy, even silently in your own awareness, you stripped it of effectiveness. They were left scrambling, trying to maintain influence where influence no longer existed. What you exposed wasn't just their manipulation, it was the deep contrast between authentic love and opportunistic intimacy. You proved that being uncompromised, fully yourself, is more powerful than any closeness forced through coercion. And that truth cuts deeper than any argument or confrontation ever could. Number 4. You realized why you felt different after being close. The moment you started paying attention, you noticed it wasn't just emotional, it was physical, mental, and even spiritual. After being close to them, you didn't feel lighter, energized, or connected. You felt drained, foggy, or even irritated without reason. Your clarity slipped, your focus wavered, and suddenly the simplest decisions felt harder. That wasn't coincidence. That was your body, your mind, and your intuition all signaling the same truth. What you were experiencing wasn't mutual intimacy. It was contamination. Some people don't share connection. They offload chaos, stress, and unresolved issues, and your system absorbs it because you're open, receptive, and aware. That realization hit hard. You understood that what felt like tension or unease wasn't imagined. It was real. Your nervous system was responding to the imbalance. Your energy was being redirected, your boundaries tested without consent. And the strangest part is that it happens almost imperceptibly. By the time you notice, hours or days have passed, leaving subtle but undeniable marks on your mood, your thoughts, and your sense of self. That's the genius of this behavior. It's invisible until you're already tangled in it. You expose the pattern by paying attention to your own response, where others might have blamed themselves, doubted their judgment, or chalked it up to personality clash. You recognized it as a reflection of their strategy, not your weakness. You realized that emotional, mental, and even physical states are constantly being exchanged in close contact. When someone carries unresolved issues and uses intimacy as a vector, they're transmitting it, and the recipient often doesn't notice until clarity returns. Once you saw that, everything shifted. You didn't need confrontation, drama, or explanations. Awareness alone became your shield. You stopped internalizing what wasn't yours, stopped overanalyzing interactions, and reclaimed your energy. And the moment you did, the pattern was exposed. People who rely on subtle manipulation crumble when their tactics are no longer effective. Your clarity, your observation, your unshakable awareness became the mirror that revealed the truth. Closeness isn't always connection, and not everyone who touches your life intends to lift it. Number 5. They confused access with ownership. One of the most revealing things you exposed is how some people mistake being close to you for having authority over you. Just because they were allowed into your life, your thoughts, or your private moments, they acted as if it gave them the right to rewrite your story, define your behavior, or dictate how others should perceive you. Access is temporary. Ownership is impossible. And that line, which they blurred so casually, is where their real vulnerability showed. They believed proximity equaled control, but what you exposed is that intimacy isn't a license, it's a choice, and it doesn't come with strings they can pull at will. That confusion is what made their behavior feel so intrusive and suffocating. They commented on your decisions as if they were stakes in a game they could influence. They spread opinions about your choices like they had invested authority over your life, and every time they tried to enforce that imagined ownership, you could see the cracks. The energy they projected was desperate, almost pleading, because deep down they knew the truth. No one can own another person, not even through closeness. Your awareness became the boundary they couldn't cross. By recognizing their assumptions, you removed their imagined power. What they thought was control was exposed as projection, a way to feel important, dominant, or validated without actually earning it. They were attempting to manage perception, to mold reality to their liking, but your clarity refused to bend. You understood that intimacy is a mirror, not a leash, and when you held firm to your truth, their entire strategy crumbled. The beauty of this revelation is subtle but profound. Once you stop letting someone confuse access with ownership, their attempts to manipulate lose meaning. They realize their influence is limited, that proximity does not equal authority, and that trust is a responsibility, not a right to exploit. You exposed not just their behavior, but the deeper lesson. Boundaries are the ultimate equalizer, and seeing them clearly makes manipulation obvious. Your clarity didn't just protect you, it stripped them of the false control they assumed they had. Number 6, you stopped internalizing what was never yours. One of the deepest truths you uncovered is that much of the weight you carried in that connection wasn't yours at all. Every sense of guilt, every flicker of shame, every whisper of self-doubt had been planted there by someone else, disguised as intimacy. They needed you to absorb it, to carry their insecurities and projections, because it relieved them of responsibility for their own unresolved issues. And for a long time, you did it. You felt the heaviness, questioned yourself endlessly, and wondered why something as simple as closeness left you so unsettled. But the moment you realized these burdens weren't yours, everything shifted. Internalizing what isn't yours is a subtle form of manipulation. It makes you think the problem lies within you, when in reality it originates from someone else's inability to process their own life. They rely on your empathy, your attentiveness, and your openness to transfer weight they can't carry alone. You didn't just notice the pattern, you felt it in your body, in your emotions, and in the way your energy shifted after encounters. That's when the truth became undeniable. You had been hosting someone else's chaos, thinking it was a reflection of your worth, when it was never about you at all. What made your realization so powerful is that it wasn't passive. You didn't simply recognize it, you stopped participating. You refused to absorb what wasn't meant for you. You drew back your emotional bandwidth, your attention, your vulnerability, and suddenly the dynamic you had known for so long started collapsing. Without your energy feeding it, their attempts to influence, unsettle, or control you no longer worked. You became untouchable in ways that weren't about confrontation, but about reclamation. By ceasing to internalize what was never yours, you reclaimed not just peace of mind, but clarity of identity. The toxicity that once clung to you began to lose its grip, and the people around you couldn't disguise the truth anymore. Their strategy relied on your participation, and when you withdrew it, everything they projected back into the world reflected only their own instability. What you exposed wasn't just their manipulation. It was the immense power of recognizing that your energy belongs to you and you alone. Number 7. They spread stories because they lost influence. The moment you understood why everything became public was one of the most revealing truths. They didn't gossip or share your private moments out of curiosity, boredom, or even malice alone. They did it because they realized they were losing control. Influence, not connection, had always been their goal, and when that influence slipped, panic set in. Suddenly the secrets, the intimate moments, the personal details that had been entrusted to them became weapons, broadcasted to anyone who would listen. What you exposed is that storytelling in this context isn't random. It's a survival tactic for people who depend on control to feel stable. The dynamic is almost mechanical. They feel threatened when someone refuses to be molded, when someone's perception remains firm and unshakable. That fear triggers a desperate attempt to reclaim authority, not through respect or dialogue, but by trying to shape how others see you. Your private life, your honesty, your vulnerabilities suddenly become proof in their narrative, as if by convincing others they still own the story, they can maintain relevance over you. The irony is sharp. The more they try to control perception, the more exposed their insecurity becomes. What makes this even more fascinating is how transparent it becomes once you stop playing the role they expected. By holding your ground, by refusing to react in confusion or self-doubt, you remove the fuel that powers their storytelling. Without your participation, their attempt to regain influence looks frantic, illogical, and desperate. You realize that the stories weren't about you. They were about preserving their ego, saving face, and maintaining a false sense of dominance. Exposing this dynamic is powerful because it shifts the entire balance. You don't need confrontation or drama. Clarity does the work. People who depend on influence crumble when it's no longer effective, when their attempts at manipulation collide with someone unwavering. By simply being aware and uncompromised, you revealed that their storytelling was a reflection of loss, fear, and instability, not a reflection of your worth. And that realization alone is enough to unsettle them completely. Number 8. You exposed that not everyone deserves your vulnerability. One of the most powerful lessons you revealed is that vulnerability is not a universal gift. It's a currency that must be spent wisely. For far too long you gave freely, assuming that openness, honesty, and trust were met with reciprocity. But what you uncovered is that some people treat your vulnerability like entertainment, like gossip material, or like leverage. They don't hold it with care. They exploit it, manipulate it, and twist it to fit their narrative. The moment you recognized this, you understood a truth that changes everything. Not everyone deserves to see the raw, unfiltered parts of you. Vulnerability is a form of power, not weakness. When you expose your inner world, your emotions, and your thoughts to someone, you're allowing them access to your energy, your perspective, and your identity. If that energy is mishandled, it doesn't just hurt, it corrupts. That's why the people you exposed didn't just take what you shared. They transformed it into something that suited them, something that reinforced their ego while diminishing your presence. They thrived on your openness, but only because it gave them room to maneuver, manipulate, and perform control. What made your revelation so transformative is that it wasn't about shutting down, it was about discernment. You didn't stop being vulnerable. You stopped being vulnerable to people who had proven they could not handle it responsibly. You drew lines that could not be crossed and made it clear, without saying much, that your trust was selective. The energy that once nourished them now stayed with you, intact and uncompromised. By doing this, you didn't just protect yourself. You exposed a pattern that few people see. Intimacy is not inherently sacred. Its sanctity is determined by the person receiving it. You revealed that safeguarding your vulnerability is not selfish, it's essential. And once this boundary is in place, it forces those who tried to misuse your openness to confront their own desperation and immaturity, leaving their insecurity fully visible. Your clarity didn't just protect you, it held up a mirror to everyone who underestimated the value of the truth you carry. Number 9. They weaponized familiarity. What you exposed is one of the most subtle and dangerous tactics, using familiarity as a weapon. They knew you, the real you. They knew your soft spots, your triggers, your routines, and the ways you process emotions. They had intimate knowledge of your patterns, your responses, and even the parts of yourself you rarely shared with anyone else. And instead of treating that knowledge with respect, they used it as a blueprint to manipulate, destabilize, and control. That's the cruel genius of this kind of behavior. It looks like closeness, but every move is calculated to unsettle you while maintaining the illusion of care. When someone weaponizes familiarity, the effects are disorienting. You feel as though you're losing your footing inside your own life. Words and actions that once felt safe start to carry hidden agendas. Every gesture has an unspoken weight. They leverage your habits, your reactions, even your compassion to serve their own narrative. Over time, the cumulative effect is a subtle erosion of self-confidence. You start questioning your judgment, doubting your perception, and wondering why nothing feels straightforward anymore. That's the hallmark of someone exploiting intimacy. They bend the familiar into a tool of control. The moment you realize this, the power shifted. Awareness dismantled the illusion. When you saw that your own openness and trust had been turned against you, you no longer participated unconsciously. You reclaimed your boundaries, your energy, and your narrative. The very knowledge they had counted on to manipulate you became the reason they lost influence. They expected you to be predictable, to internalize their distortions, to remain entangled in confusion. Instead, you observed, adjusted, and refused to feed the pattern. Exposing this tactic changes everything. It shows that closeness isn't always nurturing, and familiarity isn't always safe. Your recognition of their manipulation didn't just protect you, it revealed the fragility behind their control. People who weaponize intimacy rely on secrecy and trust, and once those are no longer available, their power collapses. By maintaining your clarity and refusing to be bent by their knowledge of you, you turned the very tool they used into a reflection of their desperation, leaving them exposed for what they truly are. Number 10. You broke the pattern they learned to depend on. One of the most powerful things you revealed is that some people rely on patterns, not relationships. They expect confusion, emotional entanglement, and dependency to be constants, and they shape their behavior around those expectations. Over time, you became part of a system they thought would always function the same way. They created chaos, you absorbed it, and they maintained a sense of control through your participation. The moment you stepped out of that cycle, you broke more than a habit. You broke the foundation they depended on. They had grown accustomed to predictability, but not the kind that comes from integrity. Their strategy relied on your reactions, your attempts to reconcile, your willingness to navigate their manipulation. They assumed you would continue to play your role, that you would internalize their projections, and that their influence over your energy and perception would remain uninterrupted. By refusing to follow the script, you exposed the illusion of stability that they had built for themselves. The pattern crumbled because it wasn't a real dynamic. It was a fabricated ecosystem designed to sustain their sense of importance. Breaking the pattern didn't require confrontation. It required awareness and refusal. You observed, understood, and chose clarity over confusion. You didn't argue, explain, or justify your distance. You simply existed outside their expectations, and that alone was enough to make them panic. The cycle they relied on couldn't survive without your participation, and when it collapsed, the instability they had hidden behind manipulation became visible to everyone around them. What this reveals is extraordinary. Patterns can hold more power than personalities. People who thrive on manipulation create rhythms that feel inevitable, but those rhythms exist only as long as the other person complies. By removing yourself from the cycle, you forced them to confront a truth they had long avoided. Their control was conditional, fragile, and entirely dependent on someone else's energy. In breaking the pattern, you didn't just protect yourself. You exposed their strategy for what it truly was, leaving them vulnerable, unprepared, and powerless in the face of your unwavering clarity. Number 11. They couldn't replicate what they took from you. One of the most revealing truths you exposed is that what they gained from being close to you was never theirs to keep. They absorbed your energy, your confidence, your clarity, your groundedness, and perhaps even your sense of calm in chaotic moments. But the moment you stepped back, they realized they couldn't replicate it on their own. That's the irony. They relied on you not just for companionship, but for stability. Without your presence, their borrowed strength dissolved, leaving them raw, reactive, and exposed. This is why your absence had such an immediate effect. People who rely on someone else's energy can appear competent, confident, or composed when the other person is around. But remove that anchor, and the facade falls apart. Suddenly their control feels shaky, their stories lose impact, and the sense of dominance they projected becomes transparent. You exposed the fragility behind their borrowed strength simply by stepping out of the dynamic. The more they tried to emulate or explain their way back into power, the clearer it became that they were running on borrowed energy all along. What makes this moment so powerful is that it reveals the difference between authentic capability and dependency. Authenticity doesn't collapse when the mirror is removed. Dependency does. They counted on you to prop them up emotionally and psychologically, and once you reclaimed your energy, the illusion evaporated. They realized that the qualities they displayed in your presence, composure, insight, confidence, were reflections of you, not self-generated. That realization shakes people to their core because it forces them to confront the uncomfortable truth. They thrived not on their own merit, but on the support of someone who would not remain compromised. You exposed this not by confrontation or accusation, but by awareness and boundaries. You didn't have to prove anything. Your clarity and self-possession did the work. In that, you revealed a universal lesson. Some people can benefit from your energy, but that doesn't make it theirs to take or keep. Once they realize they can't replicate it, their desperation and instability become obvious, and the power dynamic flips completely. The very thing they tried to control becomes the measure of their own inadequacy. Number 12. You forced them to sit with themselves. One of the most powerful things you revealed is that your clarity forced them to confront a truth they had long avoided, themselves. For a long time, they relied on your energy, your reactions, and your presence to distract from their own inner chaos. Intimacy had been a shield for them, a way to avoid facing their unresolved fears, insecurities, and contradictions. But when you stopped participating in their game, when you reclaimed your boundaries and refused to absorb what wasn't yours, you left them alone with themselves. And that is a moment of reckoning no one can fake their way through. Being left alone with their own thoughts and unresolved issues is uncomfortable in ways they weren't prepared for. Suddenly, the patterns they depended on, projecting blame, spreading stories, manipulating perception, no longer worked. The excuses, the performances, and the explanations became hollow because your clarity exposed the reality. The disruption they felt wasn't caused by you. It was caused by their own inability to process themselves honestly. You didn't need to confront them or prove a point. Your presence outside their influence created a space in which they had no choice but to sit with their own reflection. This is where their panic begins. People who rely on others to stabilize them are forced to face discomfort they've spent years avoiding. They can't hide behind your energy anymore, can't manipulate perception with your reactions, and can't distract from their weaknesses. Your refusal to engage turns the mirror around, and suddenly their insecurities, their dependency, and their manipulations are all visible, not just to you, but in the way they behave publicly. The desperation becomes palpable, the instability impossible to conceal. By doing this, you expose the difference between someone who grows through self-reflection and someone who depends on others to maintain their equilibrium. Your awareness didn't just protect you, It revealed them for what they truly are. The power they thought they held collapses the moment they can no longer outsource their inner work, and your clarity forces them to confront a reality they have spent far too long running from. In that confrontation, they are left exposed, vulnerable, and utterly unprepared. Number 13. You changed the conversation without saying much. One of the most striking things you revealed is that sometimes power doesn't come from speaking, it comes from showing. You didn't need to argue, explain, or defend yourself. By simply being consistent, composed, and clear, you altered the entire dynamic. People who relied on confusion, gossip, or manipulation found themselves disarmed. Your presence, your quiet confidence, and your refusal to participate in their distortions changed the conversation entirely. Suddenly, the narrative they had constructed about you no longer held any weight, because you weren't feeding it, reacting to it, or validating it. Your clarity became a silent authority. While they scrambled to explain, justify, or manipulate perception, you stood firm, unaffected by their noise. That contrast was undeniable. The more they tried to regain influence through chatter or dramatics, the more obvious it became that their version of reality was built on borrowed control, not truth. You exposed that consistency and self-awareness is far more disruptive than any argument. It forces people to confront the disparity between perception and reality, and that exposure is destabilizing in ways that confrontation never could achieve. What makes this so powerful is that you change the conversation without needing to claim victory overtly. By observing, understanding, and maintaining your composure, you force them to respond rather than act freely. They could no longer rely on your reactions to manipulate or distract. Your silence, steadiness, and unshakable presence became the clearest mirror to their strategies, showing everyone around them exactly how they had been attempting to control perception. This revelation flips the entire power structure. You demonstrated that influence isn't in how loudly someone speaks, but in how grounded they remain while others flail. People who rely on chaos and confusion crumble when confronted with calm, consistency, and awareness. By simply being unmovable, you rewrote the rules of engagement. You didn't just protect yourself, you exposed the fragility of their control, the emptiness behind their narratives, and the truth that clarity alone can dismantle manipulation without ever needing to raise a voice. Number 14. You exposed that energy is traded, not just time. One of the deepest truths you revealed is that intimacy is never neutral. It's not just about shared moments or hours spent together. It's about energy. Every interaction, every gesture, every moment of closeness carries a transfer, whether consciously acknowledged or not. Some people treat it like a simple exchange of time or affection, but what you uncovered is far more profound. Energy is always moving, being given, received, or taken. And when someone misuses intimacy, that energy is drained from you and redistributed to serve their needs, not yours. This is why you felt so heavy after being close to them, why your clarity seemed dulled and your focus scattered. You weren't imagining it. You were physically and emotionally experiencing the results of someone siphoning your energy under the guise of connection. They weren't just taking your time, they were taking your equilibrium, your confidence, and your sense of self. That awareness hit hard because it reframes the entire concept of intimacy. It's not simply being together, it's a constant flow, and you have to be aware of who you're allowing into your energetic space. When you recognize this, everything changed. You stopped treating closeness as a neutral experience and started seeing it as an exchange with consequences. That recognition allowed you to reclaim your energy, to stop participating in interactions that left you compromised, and to establish boundaries that weren't just physical or emotional, they were energetic. And that shift is devastating to people who rely on taking rather than giving. They realized that their usual tactics no longer worked, that their influence was gone the moment you became aware, and that the energy they depended on to feel stable and powerful could no longer be extracted. By exposing this, you revealed a fundamental truth that most people overlook. Every moment of closeness carries weight, and awareness is protection. Energy is traded, not just time, and once you understand that, manipulation loses its power. Your clarity became your shield, your withdrawal became your statement, and the people who tried to exploit you were left exposed, scrambling, and powerless against a force they had always underestimated. You. Every revelation we've explored here paints a picture far deeper than surface-level drama. What you've uncovered is not just about betrayal, manipulation, or gossip. It's about the invisible dynamics that govern energy, trust, and power in human relationships. You saw clearly that intimacy can be weaponized, that vulnerability is not a universal gift, and that presence alone can expose the deepest insecurities of those around you. You realized that what others take from you, whether energy, trust, or clarity, cannot be owned or replicated, and that your awareness is the ultimate shield. Each point we've unpacked reveals a singular truth. The world only knows what you allow it to, and clarity, composure, and discernment are far more powerful than reaction, argument, or confrontation. By observing patterns, reclaiming your boundaries, and refusing to internalize what isn't yours, you not only protected yourself, but revealed the fragility of those who thrived on manipulation. You forced people to confront themselves, you disrupted their expectations, and you shattered the illusions they had built around control and influence. What they counted on as predictable, the chaos they created, the narratives they spread, the emotional weight they shifted, crumbled the moment you became aware. And in doing so, you reminded everyone watching that true power is not about dominance, exposure, or loud proclamations. It is about presence, integrity, and the unshakable understanding of your own value. This is a lesson that goes far beyond a single relationship or a moment in time. It is a reminder that you carry authority over your own energy, that your boundaries are sacred, and that awareness itself is an unstoppable force. Those who tried to manipulate, control, or diminish you were never truly in charge. They were dependent on your participation, and the moment you withdrew it, the truth became undeniable. You exposed everything, not with anger or confrontation, but with clarity, observation, and unshakable self-possession. That is the ultimate power, and it is far more compelling than any story they could tell about you. If this message resonated with you, if it opened your eyes to the subtle truths of human interaction, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights like this. Hit the like button to show your support, leave a comment to share your thoughts or experiences, and don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs to see it. The truth has power, and together we amplify it. God bless you.